Hello everyone, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today we're diving into a heartwarming countryside story filled with love, hard work, and unexpected twists. As Tiểu and CEO Quân grow closer through their simple life together, someone secretly becomes jealous enough to change everything. What happens when a peaceful romance suddenly turns into a desperate search in the middle of the night? Stay with us to find out. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our upcoming videos. The countryside morning began peacefully as soft golden sunlight stretched across the fields. A gentle breeze carried the scent of grass and soil through the village, while birds sang from the trees lining the dirt roads. Everything felt calm and familiar. Just another beautiful day in the countryside. In the front yard of her home, Trin was helping her father feed the chickens. While scattering grain across the ground, she occasionally glanced toward the road leading into the village, as if she was waiting for someone to appear. Her father noticed immediately. "You've been looking down that road all morning," he said with a smile. "Who are you waiting for?" Trin looked away shyly. "No one." Her father laughed. "You're not very convincing." After a brief pause, Trin finally admitted the truth. "I was thinking about CEO Quân." "Again?" Trin nodded. "I haven't seen him around lately. He used to come through the village every now and then, but recently he seems to have disappeared. He's probably busy with work." "Maybe." She lowered her gaze. "I don't know. I just think he's a really good person. He's kind to everyone, hardworking, and easy to talk to. I wish I could get to know him better." Her father immediately understood what his daughter meant. "Oh, so that's it." Trin's cheeks turned red. "Dad," he chuckled. "All right, next time I see Uncle Bien, I'll ask if he has CEO Quan's phone number." Trin's eyes lit up instantly. "Really?" "Of course." "Thank you, Dad." She hugged his arm happily, feeling a spark of hope growing inside her heart. Meanwhile, on the other side of the village, another day was just beginning. Tiểu stepped out of her house wearing her familiar straw hat and carrying a woven basket on her back. As soon as she reached the gate, she saw CEO Quân waiting outside. Although he was known as a successful CEO, he looked completely at home in the countryside. Dressed in simple work clothes, he stood under the morning sunlight with a gentle smile on his face. "Ready?" he asked. Tiểu nodded. "Ready. Let's go. We need to harvest the watermelons from the far field today. Then we'd better get moving." Together, they walked along the dirt path that wound through the village. The morning sun was already growing stronger. Rice fields stretched endlessly on both sides of the road, their green stalks swaying softly in the breeze. Neither of them spoke much. They simply walked side by side, yet somehow the silence felt comfortable rather than awkward. When they finally reached the watermelon field, countless green melons were scattered across the ground like emerald gems beneath the sunlight. Tiểu crouched beside one of them. "I think this one is ripe." CEO Quân knelt beside her. "Let me check." He tapped the watermelon gently with his fingers. A deep, hollow sound echoed from inside. He smiled. "You're right." Tiểu grinned proudly. "I knew it. You're better at this than I expected. I've been helping in fields like this since I was a child." The two of them began harvesting. CEO Quân carefully cut the stems while Tiểu lifted the watermelons into baskets. As the hours passed, the sun climbed higher into the sky. Sweat slowly appeared on their foreheads. Despite the heat, neither complained. They simply focused on their work. After nearly an hour, Tiểu paused to wipe away perspiration. CEO Quân noticed immediately. Without saying anything, he handed her a bottle of water. "Drink." "You first." "I'm fine." She accepted it. "Thank you." A few minutes later, a strong gust of wind swept across the field. Tiểu straw hat flew off her head and rolled several feet away. She was about to chase after it when CEO Quân reached it first. He picked it up, dusted it off carefully, and returned it to her. "Here." Tiểu accepted the hat. "Thank you." "No problem." Their eyes met briefly. Both smiled before returning to work. As noon approached, the heat became almost unbearable. The sunlight blazed overhead, turning the entire field into a sea of shimmering gold. Tu finally sat down to catch her breath. CEO Quân looked toward a large tree standing at the edge of the field. "Let's rest over there. We still have a lot left to harvest. You'll get sick if you keep working under the sun." She hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Okay." Under the shade of the giant tree, the temperature felt instantly cooler. CEO Quân selected one of the freshly harvested watermelons. "Want to try one?" Tu laughed. "Right now? I'm thirsty." "So am I." Using his knife, CEO Quân sliced the watermelon in half. Bright red flesh appeared instantly, glistening with juice. Tu-Lac's eyes widened. "That looks amazing. It should be sweet." She took a bite. The refreshing sweetness filled her mouth immediately. "It's delicious." CEO Quân tasted a piece himself. "Looks like we had a good harvest." The two sat beneath the tree, eating watermelon while enjoying the breeze. The scent of farmland drifted through the air. Time seemed to slow down around them. For a moment, there were no worries, no responsibilities, and no deadlines. Just two people enjoying a peaceful afternoon together. Tu-Lac stared toward the distant fields. "I like living like this." CEO Quân turned toward her. "Like what?" "Simple." She smiled softly. "Peaceful, quiet, no pressure." CEO Quân nodded. "I understand. I used to think I'd leave the countryside someday." "What changed?" Tu-Lac looked around at the fields, the trees, and the endless blue sky. Then she smiled. "I realize this place isn't so bad after all." CEO Quân was silent for several seconds. Without realizing it, he found himself looking at her rather than the scenery. "Yeah," he finally said. "I think so too." Neither of them said anything after that, yet somehow the silence felt meaningful, comfortable, natural. After resting for a while, they returned to work. By early afternoon, the final baskets were loaded onto the cart. Tu-Lac wiped sweat from her forehead and smiled proudly. "We finished." CEO Quân nodded. "Good job. You too." They laughed together. Soon afterward, they transported the watermelons to the village market. The market was crowded and lively. Vendors called out to customers. Children ran between stalls. The atmosphere was full of energy. Tu-Lac arranged the watermelons neatly while CEO Quân helped weigh and package them. An elderly woman approached their stand. "Are these sweet?" she asked. Tu-Lac smiled warmly. "Very sweet. We harvested them this morning." The woman nodded. "Then I'll take two." "Of course." As the afternoon continued, more customers arrived. Some bought one watermelon, others bought several. Thanks to the quality of the harvest, the watermelons sold quickly. Within only a few hours, their stall was nearly empty. Tu-Lac stared at the last watermelon being carried away. "We sold everything." CEO Quân smiled. "I told you they'd sell. I didn't think it would happen this fast." "That's because they're good." She laughed. "You're awfully confident." "I'm complimenting your hard work." "My hard work?" "You took care of the field." A faint blush appeared on her face. She looked away quickly, trying to hide her smile. As the sun began sinking toward the horizon, they packed their belongings and headed home. Golden evening light covered the village roads. The air felt cooler now, much more comfortable than the intense heat of midday. When they arrived home, Tu-Lac looked at several watermelons they had kept aside. "I have an idea." "What is it?" "Let's make watermelon jelly." CEO Quân raised an eyebrow. "You know how?" "Of course." "And I don't." "Then I'll teach you." "Sounds fair." Together, they carried the watermelons into the kitchen. Tu-Lac sliced them into pieces while CEO Quân removed the seeds. "Am I doing this right?" he asked. "Yes." "What about this?" "That's right too." CEO Quân smiled proudly. "Maybe I'm talented." Tu-Lac laughed. "You're complimenting yourself now?" Their laughter filled the small kitchen. After collecting the watermelon flesh, they blended it and strained the juice. CEO Quân followed every instruction carefully while Tu Lac guided him through each step. Soon the fresh juice was poured into a pot. She added jelly powder and stirred slowly. CEO Quân prepared the stove. As the mixture heated, a sweet watermelon aroma spread throughout the room. It smells amazing. Just wait until it's finished. I'm already looking forward to it. The mixture was poured into molds and carefully arranged on the table. CEO Quân stared at them. So what now? We wait. How long? Until it sets. He sighed dramatically. Waiting is the hardest part. Tu Lac laughed. You sound like a child. Outside, the evening sky gradually turned orange. The village grew quieter as families returned home after a long day. While waiting for the jelly to set, Tu Lac and CEO Quân sat together on the front porch, talking about ordinary things and enjoying the peaceful evening. Neither of them noticed that elsewhere in the village, Trin's father had just learned something that deeply concerned him. And those thoughts would soon push him toward a decision that could threaten the peaceful happiness growing between Tu Lac and CEO Quân. The peaceful rhythm of village life continued after the day Tu Lac and CEO Quân had harvested and sold their watermelons together. For several days, everything seemed normal. Each morning, the two of them met before sunrise and walked side by side toward the fields. Sometimes they worked in the vegetable garden. Sometimes they repaired fences, cleaned irrigation channels, or helped neighbors with small tasks. The work was never easy, but somehow it felt lighter whenever they were together. The villagers had begun noticing it as well. Whenever Tu Lac appeared, CEO Quân seemed happier. Whenever CEO Quân arrived, Tu Lac's smile became brighter. Although neither of them had openly confessed their feelings, everyone could see the affection growing between them. Everyone except one person who refused to accept it. Trin. One afternoon, she stood near the village well filling buckets with water while secretly watching Tu Lac and CEO Quân laughing together in the distance. The sight made her chest tighten. She had admired CEO Quân for a long time. Ever since he first came to the village, he had left a strong impression on her. Unlike many successful businessmen, he never acted superior. He treated everyone with respect and kindness. The more she learned about him, the more she wanted to get closer to him. But every time she tried, it seemed as though Tu Lac was always there. Watching the two of them together felt like watching a door slowly close in front of her. That evening, Trin returned home feeling unusually quiet. Her father immediately noticed. You seem upset. Trin forced a smile. I'm fine. No, you're not. She sat down across from him. For a few moments, neither spoke. Finally, Trin sighed. I think CEO Quân likes Tu Lac. Her father frowned. Why would you say that? Because it's obvious. She looked down at her hands. They spend every day together. That doesn't mean anything. It means something. Her voice became softer. When he looks at her, it's different. The room fell silent. Trin continued. I don't think he'll ever notice me. For a brief moment, genuine sadness appeared on her face. Her father hated seeing it. As a parent, he had always wanted his daughter to be happy. Unfortunately, instead of accepting reality, he began allowing his emotions to cloud his judgment. If Tu Lac wasn't around, the thought appeared again, this time stronger than before. Trin stood up and walked toward her room. Forget it. Trin. She stopped. If CEO Quân chooses Tu Lac, that's his choice. Her father stared at her. I don't want anyone getting hurt because of me. Then she disappeared into her room. The words should have ended the matter, but they didn't. Because while Trin was trying to move on, her father was moving in a much darker direction. Over the next week, he quietly gathered information. He learned about Tu Lac's daily routine, where she worked, when she went to the market, which roads she usually used. The more he watched, the more convinced he became that she was the obstacle standing between his daughter and the future he imagined. Meanwhile, Tu Lac remained completely unaware. One bright morning, she and CEO Quan were working in a vegetable field near the river. The weather was beautiful. Birds flew across the sky. The river sparkled under the sunlight. After finishing their work, they sat beneath a large tree overlooking the water. CEO Quan handed her a bottle of water. "You've worked hard today," Tu laughed. "So have you." He smiled. "I think I'm getting used to village life." "Really? At first I thought I'd only stay here for a short time. And now?" CEO Quan looked toward the horizon. "Now I'm not so sure." Tu-Lac's curiosity grew. "What changed?" CEO Quan glanced at her. For a moment, neither spoke. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Maybe I found a reason to stay." Tu-Lac immediately understood what he meant. A soft blush appeared on her cheeks. She quickly looked away. The silence that followed was gentle rather than awkward. Both of them felt the same thing. Neither was ready to say it aloud, but their hearts already knew. As the afternoon passed, they returned to the village together. Several villagers smiled knowingly as they walked by. One elderly woman even joked, "You two look like a married couple already." Tu-Lac nearly dropped the basket she was carrying. CEO Quan laughed. The old woman walked away chuckling, while Tu-Lac's face turned completely red. That evening, CEO Quan found himself unable to stop thinking about her. The way she smiled, the way she laughed, the way she always cared about others before herself. For the first time in many years, his thoughts weren't occupied by business plans or future investments. They were occupied by one person, Tu-Lac. Several days later, an opportunity finally appeared for Trin's father. A man from another village agreed to help him carry out a plan in exchange for money. It was supposed to be temporary, just enough to remove Tu-Lac from CEO Quan's life for a while. At least that's what he told himself. Deep down, he knew his actions were wrong, but he ignored his conscience. On a warm afternoon, Tu-Lac was preparing vegetables when a village resident approached her. "Tu-Lac." She looked up. "Yes?" "An elderly woman near the forest needs help transporting supplies." "Oh?" She asked if someone from the village could assist her. Tu-Lac immediately nodded. Of course. Helping neighbors was second nature to her. She never imagined the request was fake. Before leaving, she stopped by CEO Quan's house. "I'm going to help someone near the forest." CEO Quan looked concerned. "Alone? It won't take long. I can come with you." She smiled. "You've got enough work already. At least let me walk with you." Tu-Lac shook her head. "I'll be back before dinner." CEO Quan reluctantly agreed. "Call me if anything happens." "I will." With that, she started walking down the forest path. The weather remained pleasant. The road seemed ordinary at first, but after nearly 30 minutes of walking, Tu-Lac began noticing unfamiliar surroundings. She slowed her pace. This doesn't look right. The path seemed different from what she expected. The houses she had been told about were nowhere in sight. A feeling of unease crept into her chest. She turned around, then suddenly froze. Several men emerged from behind nearby trees. Her heart nearly stopped. "What do you want?" No answer. The men slowly approached. Fear rushed through her body. She tried backing away. One of the men spoke. "Don't resist." The situation became terrifyingly clear. She had been lured there. Before she could escape, the men surrounded her. Back in the village, CEO Quan continued his work. At first, he wasn't worried. Tu-Lac often spent extra time helping others. An hour passed, then another. The sun began setting, still no sign of her. His concern grew. He called her phone. No answer. Again, no answer. A third time, nothing. The uneasy feeling in his chest became impossible to ignore. He immediately went looking for her. Several villagers confirmed seeing Tu-Lac heading toward the forest earlier that day, but no one had seen her return. CEO Quan's expression changed instantly. Something was wrong, very wrong. Without wasting another second, he organized a search. Dozens of villagers volunteered immediately. Flashlights appeared throughout the village. People spread across roads, fields, hills, and forest trails. Everyone knew Tu Lac. Everyone cared about her. As darkness covered the countryside, the search became more urgent. CEO Quân moved faster than anyone else. He called her name repeatedly. His voice echoed through the trees. Tu Lac! Only silence answered. Hours passed. The forest became darker. The temperature dropped. But CEO Quân refused to stop. Every minute that passed increased his anxiety. He remembered their first conversation, their days in the watermelon field, the watermelon jelly they had made together, their shared laughter, their quiet conversations. The realization struck him harder than ever before. He loved her, not as a friend, not as a partner. He genuinely loved her, and the thought of losing her filled him with fear. Meanwhile, Tu Lac sat alone inside an abandoned storage building deep within the forest. The room was dimly lit. Dust covered the floor. Old wooden crates lined the walls. Although she wasn't physically harmed, she was frightened. She had no idea what would happen next. The uncertainty was unbearable. Occasionally, she heard voices outside, footsteps, doors opening and closing. Every sound made her heart race. She tried remaining calm. She tried convincing herself that CEO Quân would find her. But as the hours passed, fear became harder to control. Back in the village, Trin noticed the growing panic. People were rushing through the streets. Groups carrying flashlights moved in every direction. When she learned Tu Lac had disappeared, she felt immediate shock. What? One villager nodded. No one can find her. A terrible feeling settled in her stomach. She hurried home. Inside, she found her father sitting quietly. Too quietly. Dad, he looked up. What happened? Tu Lac is missing. For a brief second, something flashed across his face. Guilt, fear, regret. The expression disappeared quickly, but Trin had already seen it. Her heart sank. Dad. He said nothing. The silence was enough. Everything suddenly made sense. The secretive behavior, the strange questions, his obsession with helping her. Tears filled her eyes. You didn't? Still silence. Her voice trembled. Tell me you didn't. Her father lowered his head. The truth became undeniable. Trin stepped backward in horror. How could you? I was trying to help you. Help me? Tears streamed down her face. This isn't helping me, her voice echoed through the room. You think I wanted this? He remained silent. You think I wanted someone innocent to suffer because of me? For the first time, genuine shame appeared on his face. Everything he had justified suddenly sounded ridiculous. I thought, no. Trin shook her head. You didn't think. She pointed toward the door. People are searching for her right now. The weight of his actions finally began crashing down around him. Trin wiped away her tears. If you care about me at all, you'll tell the truth. Then she turned and ran into the night, determined to find CEO Quân, determined to fix what had been done. Elsewhere, CEO Quân continued searching beneath the darkness. Exhaustion burned through his body, but he refused to stop, not while Tu Lac remained missing, not while she might be frightened and alone. As the search continued, one of the villagers suddenly discovered a piece of fabric caught on a broken branch. CEO Quân rushed over. The moment he saw it, his heart dropped. It belonged to Tu Lac. At last, a clue, the first real clue. His eyes hardened with determination. He gripped the fabric tightly. Somewhere nearby, Tu Lac was waiting, and no matter what stood in his way, he was going to find her. As CEO Quân and Tu Lac spent more time together working in the fields, selling produce and enjoying the simple beauty of village life, their feelings for each other continued to grow stronger. While the two quietly build a deep connection, Trin struggles to accept that CEO Quan's heart belongs to someone else. Wanting to help his daughter, Trin's father makes a terrible decision that changes everything. After Tu Lac is tricked into leaving the village to help a supposed neighbor, she suddenly disappears without a trace. As night falls, panic spreads through the countryside. CEO Quân desperately organizes a search, refusing to give up as he realizes how much Tu truly means to him. Meanwhile, Trin uncovers a shocking truth about her father's actions. With time running out, will CEO Quân find Tu before it's too late?